Hello, my name is Marley, and my presentation is on historicity, or the validity of the resurrection, and it would be presented to an adult Sunday school context. So I would start out with by listing the four most common objections or questions about the validity of the resurrection. Those being, doesn't it violate natural laws? Are the accounts, i.e. like the manuscripts of the resurrection, even trustworthy? Couldn't the disciples have just stolen the body, and couldn't it have just been like a mass hallucination of some sort? So I'd start out with those, obviously giving like respect to those questions, because I do think we should be asking them, because if we're not asking them, how can we answer them? And how can we answer other people? So I'd start with, doesn't it violate natural laws? And the answer to that is yes. But if there is a God, we can expect him to intervene in the laws that he created and deemed natural in any way that he wants to. And so I would quote Rebecca McLaughlin, the apologist and author, saying, the one who made the laws of nature in the first place can surely intervene when he so chooses. So I would want to cite her, but then I would also want to cite MIT professor and scientist Ian Hutchinson, who said the presumption that the laws of nature are inviolable is just not a doctrine of science. Science's method and program is to describe the universe insofar as it is reproducible and follows universal laws. But science has not the slightest need to extrapolate that method and program into a presumption that everything that happens must be so describable. And that's pretty like wordy and technical. So then I would want to rephrase it as science's domain is just to describe what usually and naturally happens. It doesn't prescribe those laws into just everything. Like, that's just not science's domain. So I'd want to quote the apologist and author, and then MIT professor, scientist, author, but then I would also want to make the note, still talking about the natural laws, that if you don't believe in God, or you're talking to someone who doesn't believe in God, this is not the place to be starting anyways. Like, you're better off with the cosmological argument, which you can ask me about after, or I would say, would say to them in the presentation, you can ask me about after. So that's the first one, is doesn't it break natural laws? The second is, are the accounts of the resurrection even trustworthy, i.e. the gospel manuscripts? And there are a ton of ways to come at this question, so I would have to be kind of choosy in my presentation to them of like how to keep it pretty brief. But all of the gospel accounts were written in the first century, which is insane. Like, that's just decades after the events themselves, which is huge, because during that time, historical accounts weren't written until centuries later, usually. And that also means that all of the eyewitnesses were still alive to testify and to correct, if someone was getting a detail wrong or something like that. Additionally, myths generally take at least 2 generations to form, because by that point, all of your eyewitnesses have died out. And so if all of our gospel accounts were written in the first century, there hasn't been time for myths to form. So I would make that point, and then I would also make the point that we have 5,600 copies of the Greek New Testament, which is just like an almost unfathomable amount, and then 20,000 copies of the New Testament in other ancient languages. And that's compared to our accounts of Julius Caesar's life, which is like, I don't know, 3. At that point, also during the presentation, I'd want to like pull out 3 pieces of paper to show this is all that we needed to believe, in things about Julius Caesar's life, and then pull out 5,600 and like 20,000 copies of just like printer paper, to like, so that everyone could see visually how many more manuscripts we have about the life of Jesus than we do about other people in history that we just think we know a lot about. So written like within the lifetime of all the eyewitnesses, We have tons of manuscripts, and we know that we can pretty much trust those manuscripts because the scribes were really set on maintaining the validity of what they were writing. Like, they weren't changing things willy-nilly, all of that, because if their goal had been a political agenda or making more converts, there would have been things that they had taken out, or things that they would have added. So for example, like all of the women being the people to witness Jesus after his resurrection first, that would have like not held up in court during that time because they didn't count women as like valid testimonies. And so just like that would have been changed or done away with if they were just trying to make converts as much as they could at the expense of the truth. So we know that like the truth was very valuable to them, and they weren't just like they wanted to be accurate and not just winsome. So and there's enough of things that would have been changed that weren't. So we can feel like pretty confident about that. Another one of those examples that I would probably list is just leaving in a lot of really hard teachings of Jesus, like you have to hate your father and mother to come and follow me. I think it's Craig Blomberg who makes note of just what a high value the family is for the Judean culture at that point in time, and how if they were trying to make Jewish converts, they would have taken that out, and they didn't. So, we can feel pretty confident about all that. Okay, the third one that I would cover would be, couldn't the disciples have just stolen the body? And this is just really unlikely because they didn't have the means to. Like, it's not like there was one guard standing at the tomb who like would have fallen asleep. It's according to Stuart Weber's HT&C commentary on Matthew, it was likely a Roman guard that was placed, and to quote him, a normal Roman guard was made up of 16 soldiers. Roman soldiers were well known for their discipline. The penalty for negligence while on duty, falling asleep, or abandoning their post was execution. And, quote, these men would be relieved at regular intervals throughout Saturday and Sunday, end quote. So just a band of like ragtag fishermen peasants could not have taken on 16 soldiers. It's just too much, especially in the like defeated, guilty, ashamed state that they were in. Like you can't muscle up that kind of, you can't just grit your teeth and fight 16 soldiers. So additionally, grave robbers would not have had, like that's something that people say too, well, what if it was a grave robber? They wouldn't have had any motive because Jesus was poor. Like, he wasn't buried with anything that they could sell. And like, if you're a grave robber, you're going for the unguarded graves, which is most of them. Most graves are not guarded. So like, not that that's a silly question or objection, like it's one worth having, but just, when provided with the answer, it's not even, So, on to the fourth, which would be, couldn't it have been a mass hallucination? So Lapine, the Jewish author who became a Christian, is referencing like old tales from like rabbinic literature of people who had like a mass hallucination or like saw a vision, is what I would classify that as, of like Elijah or Moses or somebody talking to them. And so that's what he's referencing in this quote, and I would quote him, in none of the cases of rabbinic literature speaks of such visions did it result in an essential change in the life of those who experienced the visions. Only the vision remains, which was retold in believing wonderment, but it did not have any noticeable consequences. I would like to add, let alone an entire movement of which every major power was opposed to them. So it just, and I would also just say, there's not a lot of like literature supporting like mass hallucinations that line up to the degree that all of the disciples and apostles had. therefore pointing to it not being just a vision of Jesus. Like, you know, it was actually him. Additionally, it just being a mass hallucination would have been so easily disproved by just presenting his body, just pulling his body out of the grave on Monday and being like, well, he's still dead, so not sure what or not. Yeah, so that would be my presentation. I would have gone through the 4 of those. You know, pull out the 3 sheets of paper for Julius Caesar and the 5,620,000 for the New Testament manuscripts. Yeah, and then just recap them at the end, and probably pass out my my graphics at the end as well, just so they can, like, you know, be with me during it, and then afterwards have that to go back and look back on. So yeah, thank you.